Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. I am going to start out the podcast on a positive note today because I feel like we need it in this world of craziness that we're in right now. I was just back east in Delray, Florida, and which is beautiful. And I flew, and I'm not the best flyer. Now I'm even more nervous than ever. So thankfully that was last week that I flew. But I was with two of my childhood best friends, Carter and Kara. And I'm just going to say there is nothing like coming home to friendships and people that you've known your whole life that you can trust, like I could tell anything to these two girls, and no matter what, I met them both at 12. And when I'm with them, I felt such happiness, like my cup was full, and they will always have my backs and vice versa. And I feel like, as we grow as human beings, maybe some friendships shift and they change, and that's okay too. But these two girls, I get emotional, are just the most wonderful friends. And I just want to start the podcast by just saying how grateful I am to have such wonderful friends for all these years of my two best friends, Kara and Carter. Julie is my best friend that I talk about a lot that we lost, and she was part of our little group of friends. So when one of the days when we were walking, it was actually Kara and I talk a lot about monarch butterflies, Katherine. They're my sign that Julie's with me. And Kara and I were on this walk coming back from, walking near the beach, and we were shopping, and we were on the walk, and a monarch butterfly flew right past us. And I stopped because her sign that Julie's with us are pennies, like pennies from heaven. One time, one of the last times we saw each other, she looked down and she saw a penny. And this time we were with each other because we don't get to see each other that much because we're on separate coasts. And we saw this giant monarch butterfly fly by us. So it was pretty darn special. I'm going to say that. So you guys, when I talk to you, I always want to say, look out for the signs because they're there. I talk a lot about signs. If you've lost someone, sometimes they don't show up when you want to find the signs, but they're always going to show up. And I would always say, look for them. Katherine, before I introduce you, do you have anything to add about that? I'm sure you probably do.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And I think you're right that the universe does deliver signs, not always when you want it. You can't just wish it to appear. But if you look out for it, it's like the serendipity is there.
Yeah.
That their consciousness is still there on some level. And it's comforting.
So true. It's so true. It was just such a special time. And I just honestly, I will never take my friendships with them for granted. So thank you. If you're listening, Kara and Carter, I love you so, so much. And I consider myself lucky to have a friendship that's lasted for so long. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
So I want to introduce you all to Katherine Fabrizio. Katherine is a psychotherapist and the author of The Good Daughter Syndrome, Help for Empathic Daughters of Narcissistic, Borderline, or Difficult Mothers Trapped in the Role of the Good Daughter. I would love to introduce you correctly. I didn't mess that up. I messed up one word, which honestly means that we're on our way to a good podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Katherine.
I love it. I'm so glad to be with you, Meghan. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
I love your accent. God, there's nothing like a Southern accent. My mom lived on Kiowa Island in Charleston, which I love. And so all the ladies, because I'm considered an East Coaster. What are they called? They call them Yankees, because I went to boarding school with all Southern girls. And because even though technically I grew up above the Mason-Dixon line, they would still say that to me. But I just love the accent. I love when people would say to me in Charleston, they'd say, how's your mom doing? Just, it's the cutest thing. You can never hate a Southern accent. They just come out so wonderful and polite.
Oh, that's great. That's very sweet. Thank you.
So I'm going to start the podcast with my question that I always start it with. Tell me a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up. I know it's the South. I'm going to give you that much.
Actually, I was born in Washington, D.C. and moved when I was 2. So you were right. I moved when I was 2, but I have lived here for my whole life, my whole growing up and adult life.
Do you know what hospital you were born at in Washington, D.C.?
I do not.
Okay. Because I'm a D.C. girl. I grew up in Potomac, Maryland. But I grew up, I was born in DC as well. So I don't know why I thought that. Isn't that weird that I knew that and it wasn't in your bio?
Aren't you? And I said, well, no. And I'd forgotten I was born in DC.
Well, I'm obviously a psychic. So tell me.
Picked it up.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your childhood growing up. I know we kind of touched on before we recorded, it was not an easy one. And we're going to kind of get into that right now. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I can tell you about the good daughter syndrome and how I discovered it. And that will tell you a little bit about me.
Yeah.
So if we were to time travel, I would say a little bit over 30 years ago. I was an adult. I just finished graduate school. I had gone into practice with my mother. Mark that. I had married a lovely man. I had 2 lovely young daughters. And you would think I would have everything that I wanted, but I was paralyzed with depression. I didn't know what I thought about anything. I would cry at the drop of a hat. My mother and I, people said we were 2 peas in a pod. But the problem was there was only one pea that was in charge, and it was Mom. I thought she knew what was best for me. I thought I did what she told me to do. I was very obedient. I took her advice. She was a very smart person. She had a PhD in psychology. She was a debate champion. So here's this dilemma. I'm in practice with my mother. I mean, I knew she was a little bossy and pushy, but I got into psychotherapy myself and discovered that I was really operating under kind of an oppressive relationship that I hadn't differentiated from her, we say in psychotherapy. And so I'll never forget the day I walked into our office and with my heart in my throat, I said, Mom, I've got to leave home. I'm leaving the practice. And that had been her dream, to have a mother-daughter practice. And I knew it would break her heart, but I also knew that staying would break me. So I'd love to say that was, everything was easy peasy from there on out, but it wasn't. I did leave and formed my own practice, and we lived in the same town until her death, probably 3 years ago. And I had to renegotiate boundaries, and, there were 3 people in a marriage, Mom, my husband, and myself. There were 3 parents parenting my daughters. I had to differentiate, claim my own sense of self, my own sovereignty, one boundary at a time. And I feel like I made all the mistakes you can make. And so, although I can't make it easy for daughters who are on this journey, but I can make it easier. because I know I can flatten the learning curve. I know
because you've gone through it. When you were a child, like, so it sounds like, and I can relate to some of what, I mean, not what you said, but I spent my entire childhood trying to make my mom proud of me.
Yeah.
So there were like things where, and I'm not, Mom, if you're listening, I'm not comparing. I'm just saying there was that piece of me that can relate where I just like wanted my mom to be like, oh, wow, you can do this. You can sing, you can dance, you can do this. Did you grow up in a childhood where you just wanted to appease your mom and you just like came out that way? Or tell me a little bit about that.
You know, I believe that the truth is in the nuance. So I would say, yes, I did try to please her. I tried to make good grades, got into graduate school, became what she was. And so I don't think that that's bad necessarily. When people are in the good daughter syndrome, and I ended up there, I mean, I discovered it or conceptualized it, that's when you keep on trying to please and you're never able to fully do so. That's when the goalpost is moved again and again. So if you go back to, did you have a question for me?
No, I just was wondering, how, like, at what age was that the time that you realized that you had this syndrome 30 years ago?
I didn't realize.
No, you knew.
35 years ago.
Okay.
We didn't use the word boundaries. A narcissist was a bossy, braggadocious man, if we use that terminology at all. I was just a good girl. I was just a good daughter. I didn't know it was problematic. Now looking back, I can see, I used to sing. Mom would come and give me notes. When I would perform, I was in the play in high school, Mom would come and give me notes. She would have something to say about what friends that I chose. She would have something to say about a boyfriend. She had something to say about everything. And I really didn't know at the time that that was overstepping, that was micromanaging, that I didn't know that I was suffering at all. It was only until I was an adult and Mom was at the center of my emotional life. I didn't know what I thought about anything, but I could tell you in a nanosecond if she was okay and if she was okay with me. You know, married, I'm a mother, I have my own relationship. And yet if she sent me an email or called me, I would pick up right away. I felt a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
That I then learned was really inappropriate. It was dysfunctional. It was unbalanced. And so when I started to break away, I got a lot of pushback. And I can talk a lot more about.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Is this a common thing with women and their mothers?
It's an incredibly common thing. And I would say it's a continuum. So on one end of the continuum, you have women culturally are really socialized to base maybe their self-worth on their kids' accomplishments. So, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of your child. And of course, we take pride in it. But if we overstep and micromanage and appropriate, it's a word that I use, maybe the relationship needs a little bit of a tweak. So that's kind of coming back. And then they're full-blown narcissistic or moms who suffer with borderline personality disorder, who are kind of dyed in the wool, not going to change. And the relationship is very problematic. The mother-daughter relationship is very problematic and might need a complete overhaul or cutting off of all contact. So there is certainly a spectrum, and I can talk about how you can tell, where you are.
Yeah, I would love for you to go into, because I mean, obviously mothers and daughters, there's probably like a full spectrum, right? And this is rooted from your mom probably grew up a certain way to be the kind of, and I hate to say this, but to be the narcissist or have the borderline personality. But if somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh, my mom's such a nag, she's on me about this, or this. I know on your website, when I was looking at your bio, I went on your website and looked at you have a quiz to kind of like pinpoint how you might know if you're dealing with a parent like that. So can you kind of talk about that?
So it's like if mom always has to be right. Now, as a mother myself, I have grown daughters. I like to have wisdom that I'm passing down to my daughters. So it kind of stings when they're like, Mom, that's not right. But the relationship means so much to me that I'm willing to take that hit. It's a narcissistic hit, if we boil it down to my sense of specialness and relevance, right? To kind of come back and, okay, yeah, you know more than I do. And they really do know a lot more than I do especially about technology, but about many things. But when you have a mother, say, who's narcissistic and her supply is being superior and right all the time, and she just can't give it to you. She can't concede a point. And you're like, you're bumping your head up against a wall. And then typically what a daughter does in this situation is they get into endless arguments. They try to give enough evidence. No, Mom, you just don't see. And they end up, I did this with my mother, in endless back and forth emails and arguing. If you've ever tried to argue with a PhD psychologist who is a debate champion, I can tell you who needs to win, who needs to be right. It's a losing battle. So you can kind of see the differentiation. Also, if you say, oh, Mom, it really hurts when you do such and such. And she says, well, I'm sorry, but you, blah, 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 blah.
Okay. So like somebody that's never can give an apology, right?
It's not a genuine apology without a qualification.
Exactly. Okay. And I think a lot of women understand this, and there's probably different scales of this. I know for me, being a mother of a just newly 15, which is a blast, everyone dealing with that daughter. And then a 11, just turned 11-year-old daughter. I am so terrified constantly because of my own childhood trauma and I'll admit it. I have a narcissistic piece of me, and I think we all do.
We all do.
Where I'm like, okay, I know what I don't want for you because I made this mistake and I just don't want to see this for you. Or in some examples, I'm guilty of like, I don't want you playing with that friend because that friend was mean to you. And I just like know how girls are. Yeah. I just always wonder like where this comes from and how you make it so you don't repeat the things that you maybe were taught. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. There's a old psychoanalyst who's dead now, D.W. Winnicott, who talked about all you have to do is be a good enough mother.
Yeah.
The fact that you're struggling with it, that you're questioning it, tells me, you don't have strong narcissistic tendencies, because a true narcissist is not going to struggle with this. And it's not what you do in one instance. It's when you have a pattern of like, Mom chooses all of your friends. Mom, weighs in on forbids you to date. When it's appropriate, you have to frustrate their impulses. I know I've raised 2 daughters and they didn't like me all of the time. And I was kind of a hard ass. People are surprised to hear that, but I was willing to be hated at times.
That's hard, by the way. I'm learning that. I hate to go off track, but I'm just going to tell you, because I have a lot of moms that listen, that I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. You have these babies, and I've talked about this before. And I like today I was walking, I was telling you I had to go to the car dealership, and this woman was sitting there with her baby. And I just looked at her and I was like, I remember that. It was so wonderful. But you think, oh, this stage is so hard, where they're crying or like the diaper changing. And then you get into another stage. And now I'm in this teenage stage, and I'm constantly like, Oh my God. I am so bad at this to the point where I'm in tears constantly because I just feel like I'm yelling all the time. I'm messing up. It's hard. It's hard to be a mom, especially to daughters. And then you just don't want to repeat certain patterns, right? As well.
It's so hard. And I think the answer is in the nuance in the middle. And if you see their whole development and your whole development as a parent is attaching and letting go, investing and letting go. It's almost like we should be Buddhist monks. I don't know, like in studying non-attachment, but from what's required of us. I mean, I can say a whole lot about that. I mean, it's like if there's any narcissism or rigidity in you, parenting, particularly daughters, will find it. Yeah. They will carve your heart out with a surgical precision. So I can say that. And so I can recommend, I'm not recommending anything that I'm not willing to do. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you going through it, I made mistakes, but I had the voice like you're talking about in my head. I'm like, I really want to do this differently. I can do this differently. I can repair, say I lost it, or maybe I, in haste, put down too strict of a punishment. That's not to like ask their forgiveness or to cave, but you can always, a narcissistic mom never does the repair. That's where the difference lies. Okay. You can go back when you're regulated and say, let's revisit this. Let's give me your reasons. Convince me that it's okay for you to go to the concert. I don't know this.
No. I'm sorry to go off track, but like it is something I definitely think about because I think so many moms doubt themselves. And, you know, like I know I make mistakes every day and I might get mad. I yell a lot, which is my biggest downfall. I grew up yelling in my house. And so it's something I really have to try. And my husband says all the time, he's going to leave me for either my yelling, my shopping, or I can't remember the third thing, but I'm sure it's pretty relevant. But I was going to say that I think it's important to point out like the differences between those things, because I think most people can't admit that they struggle with parenting. I think as women, we're like pitted up against each other at such a young age, you know, and I talk about this a lot where I was actually talking to Carter about this and Kara, why when we are young, do we grow up and are so unkind to each other as women? You know, like we're just like catty. I've gone through a horrible friend breakup, which I've talked about. Why does this happen? And I always say, I think it's because of two things. It's the pressure, like to be perfect, right? That you might have gotten from a parent, or like men, boys, they make us this way. That's my own opinion about it. So I think it's important that we're like kind of talking about the differences between these things. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, I have never done an episode in all 4+ years of doing this podcast about borderline personality disorder. So I would love for you to kind of talk about that and how you knew your mom struggled with borderline personality disorder, what it exactly is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no cure for it. Am I wrong on that? I know that was a mouthful.
No, it's actually more amenable to therapy than narcissism is.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let me rewind. A lot of clients will come in and say, my mother's a narcissist. When we dig further, they're not. They have more borderline traits.
Okay.
And I'm going to unpack it all.
Yeah.
To even complicate things further, a mother can have both defenses. So the core wound of a narcissist is feelings of worthlessness and shame. So the defense is to be superior, special, and entitled. I mean, I'm collapsing it, broad brushing it. Someone who struggles with borderline personality disorder, their core wound is abandonment. So it's different. They're afraid of being abandoned. So a daughter's natural trajectory to differentiate and to establish a separate self is going to trigger those borderline defenses. A narcissistic mom has more of a need for power and superiority. And so she'll come down on a daughter, differentiating, becoming her own person, because she's threatened with the superiority thing about it. Someone who has more borderline defenses is going to be threatened because I'm going to be left alone. This. And having said that, I have felt it all. I mean, to lose that precious child who worshiped you and, hung on your every word and thought, dressed up in high heels or whatever and wanted to be you. And all of a sudden she dyes her hair or gets tattoos or, and she doesn't want to be anything like you. So it's a reiteration of the toddler stage, so throughout development, we attach and then we differentiate, attach and differentiate. And you're in the middle of teenagers who are, differentiating, but in the background, they're very dependent on the solid parenting they got early on. That's why they can differentiate. Some good daughters swallow all that. They come in and they tell me, I've never rebelled. My mother has no idea that I don't think exactly what she thinks. I've been a good girl, an obedient daughter, and she's more prone to eating disorders, cutting, depression. I say she acts in. So hopefully, maybe I may have.
No. I this all makes sense because I know this is such a common thing with daughters. Is the good daughter, like being the good daughter. I see it all the time. I actually see it with friends of my daughters where, like you see this kid and you kind of wonder like, oh my God, like, do they ever? It's a very common thing. My question though is, so when you say borderline personality disorder, okay, so, and the difference between the narcissism piece and the borderline piece and how both can go in together, like you're saying with your mom. So if somebody has borderline personality, like I'm going to use myself. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. I have major abandonment issues because I lost my dad young. I lost my sister. So I get that piece, but I do not have, as far as I know, borderline personality disorder.
Right.
So can you kind of like talk about the difference between the piece of the borderline, like what exactly is it? Without just the abandonment piece and go kind of into that?
So DSM, the way that we diagnose a person with a personality disorder is the main question is it persistent and is it pervasive? So, and I'll get to the borderline. So if mom like is always right or always has to be superior or is always entitled, never concedes, that's more of a persistent. Pervasive would be, does she break rules all the time? I had a client once whose mother was going to AA, collecting chips and drinking. She'd break in line. She'd park in a handicapped parking space. So that had nothing to do with mothering, but that's just who she was. I'm above it all. The rules are not for me. And that's rare, I'll say. Someone who is diagnosed, I'm not an expert on the diagnosis part because I think daughters are more just dealing with their individual mom.
Yeah.
But the lack of stability. So lots of folks that have a borderline defense will idealize somebody. So somebody that they've just met, like they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then the minute that they disappoint them, they're like, they're terrible. So if you're a daughter of somebody who's like this, it's hard to know, like you're always walking on eggshells because mom can also relate to you as though you're wonderful. And the minute I don't want to tell your best friend more secrets than you're telling your mom, she's like, her head spins around 3 times and she comes after you. What did I ever do? And why are you pulling away from me? Why are you lying? So that's where kind of the instability of somebody who would be diagnosed with that. However, they can also be very close and charismatic. kind of, some narcissistic personalities can be, but when you have, it's like sometimes with my mother, she would really get me and we'd feel very close. And it was so painful to follow my own trajectory to say, you know, Mom, I'm not going to tell you everything that my husband and I tell each other. I need to keep that private, or I'm not going to talk about him in his absence because I wouldn't want somebody to talk about me. And she didn't like it, and I could tell it hurt her. That's tough. I don't know if that's.
I'm wondering though, so your mom had her, like, obviously was a psychologist, like very smart woman. Did she have the ability to like self-diagnose? Because narcissism and borderline, like they would never admit this, right? So I'm curious as to
Pretty
your
much.
thoughts on that.
She had 10 years of psychoanalysis.
Okay.
Which did not eradicate it. And like all of us, when under stress, our worst traits come out. So sometimes over the long trajectory of her life, sometimes she could give it to me. Sometimes she would say, you're a better therapist than I am. You understand things I can't understand. And then her areas of competence, she was a very competent person. You know, I could give it to her. Well, Mom, you debate better than I do. So, you know, it all kind of depends. So 10 years of 3 times a week psychoanalysis helped her really keep her sanity. So she did get better.
She got better, but she never, like, obviously went full circle. I'm wondering if, like, when you finally came to your, you know, like, I don't want to say senses, but you came to the point where you said enough is enough and you walked away and kind of took your life back. Is that when she kind of went, okay? Or did that take a while to get there where she went into psychoanalysis?
It took a while to get there.
Okay.
And she could do it a lot of the time. She respected it, but she didn't always like it. And this is a message I would send maybe to your listeners who are adult daughters who have older mothers. They know on some level you have a lot of power. That's what, if I was talking to you as a good daughter, that's what I would say to you. You don't know the power that you actually have. Because when you're under the thumb, when you're trying to get it right, this endless, exhausting, thankless quest, when you give it up and you say, Mom, I'm just going to come, maybe have dinner with her every week. We're just going to come. It's going to work better for us once a month. Mm-hmm. She won't like it. She might, on a continuum, she may get very upset or she might just get huffy. But she knows you hold the cards as an adult. You really get to decide how much of your resources go her way. And when good daughters are in this syndrome, it's like news to them. They don't know it. And really, it doesn't necessarily take from Mom when you gain your independence. In the book, I talk about people feel like it's a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. Like something could be right for your mother. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to defeat her. And something else could be right for you because you have a need to differentiate.
I'm curious though, so for some people, like, and I do know somebody like this, they get to a point where they go, okay, I'm walking away. This person is a good daughter and I want zero relationship with my mother because it has only eaten away at me for my whole life and it's toxic and I'm taking my life back. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. When I have women in psychotherapy, and what I advise is to first think, okay, what's a boundary that I can see myself setting? And that's going to be different for everybody. Maybe it's not to talk to your mom 3 times, 3 hours a night. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's, I just want to visit you once a year. Okay. So you set a small boundary and brace for pushback. Because what a lot of people do, I'll give you an example. Say somebody, they're just sick and tired of their mother eating up all their time, and they Google something that says set some boundaries. And so they call their mother up and they say, hey, Mom, we always come for Thanksgiving, but this year we're thinking of staying home. The kids really don't want to travel, and yada, yada, yada. Mom's head spins around 3 times. There's a deafening silence, and she goes, what? You've always come for Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. What in the world did I do? What kind of daughter does this to her mother? I guess I'm just a terrible mother. Well, why did you not even visit me at all? Okay. And those that are listening, no, this is not out of the realm of possibility. So you've set a reasonable boundary. If you're a typical good daughter, you're going, oh gosh, I don't know what I was thinking. Of course, we'll be there. Let's just forget we ever had this conversation. Then she goes back to her therapist and says, it's not worth it. I tried to set a boundary, but she wouldn't let me, and it's not worth it. And I would say it's because when you set that small boundary, you're going to get data. You're going to get pushback, and that pushback is going to tell you something. If Mom unloads on you, you probably need the boundary desperately. Also, you wait, because some people will be, they're offended. They're like taken off guard. And then maybe she calls you back in a couple of days and like, I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry. I'm unreasonable, of course. When else can we get together? So that's the first thing I would say. If your fire text, if she calls all your relatives and you got flying monkeys, people coming after you, if she threatens to harm herself or to cut you out of the will, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But chances are you may be dealing with someone that is not, I would say, available to have a relationship. And you may cut down to very low contact or no contact. Like the woman who had the psychopath mother. There was no relationship that was available to her. People like to say, I'm in a relationship or I'm not in a relationship. But when you're with a narcissist, you're not in a relationship with the core person. You're in relationship with the armor, with the defenses. And sometimes that's no relationship at all. And so I think it's good to if you can, get with a therapist to educate yourself and to feel good about it and to do it in a sustained way. I think people have to take a reasoned, measured approach. And that's not to say that the outcome isn't go no contact. I'm agnostic about that, because for some people that definitely is the way to go. But unless you test it, I think what happens is very hard for particularly somebody in a good daughter role to sustain it. Because once the anger dissipates, like if you just react, and I understand it, boy, I've done that. Mm-hmm. And then you come away and then the guilt sets in. It's hard to sustain.
Yeah, I could see that. I feel like, too, there's probably so many people that are like, well, I need to stay in this situation. And I do, like you kind of brought up that conversation about coming for Thanksgiving or whatever it is. And they stay in the situation and then they live their whole lives because they don't ever want to stand up for themselves and kind of like take their life back.
Can I tell you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to tell you about a story of a client. Of course, no identifying information. This was actually decades ago. So this woman comes in and she says, say, what were you here for? And she says, well, my mother's dying. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And she said, but that's not my problem. My mother's dying and I never lived. When I was going away to college, Mom cried all night. And so I woke up the next morning and I told her, don't worry, Mom, I'm not going to go away. And this woman was, I would say, mid-50s. Every boyfriend I brought home, Mom found something wrong with him. And so I never married or had children. And now it's too late for me. And she's dying and I'm going to be left alone. And I was like, whoa, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And not that everybody needs to have a job or get married or have kids, but that particular story hit me. And I thought, there is a time when it is too late to become your own woman.
But don't you think, I mean, because I'm trying to compare this to, you know, also just being with, like, say you're with a man that's a narcissist and you're married. Like it's got to be like a patterned behavior where so many of these women end up going straight from the mother who's the narcissist and maybe has a borderline personality disorder to the man that's then going to control them with that. Is that a common thing too that you see?
Well, you're brilliant because it happens.
I am brilliant. I know. Thank you. If anybody doubts that, I just had somebody tell me I'm joking. Nobody has ever said I was brilliant in my entire life, but go on.
Well, because, I mean, it's also just logical. So your attachment template, it's like an accent. I don't have one until you tell me I have one. The way that a person is used to attaching. On top of that, so say I'm going to escape my controlling mother.
Yeah.
And then I get a controlling man. So I don't really have to differentiate from mom. I just go from one control person to another control person, and I'll let them fight it out. Mm-hmm. So I hear a lot of moms will write me and say, oh, my daughter's making this terrible mistake. I've got to rescue her from this terrible man. And they've missed the boat because they've micromanaged their daughter and picked who they're going to date. So that's another way it can go.
Yeah.
Let your daughters, within reason, but make some mistakes while they're young and spread their wings a bit. And I know it's such a hard judgment call.
Well, it's so hard too, because like mom, again, if you're listening, this isn't about you, but I'm just going to say, like I was saying in the beginning, my mom's getting older, and, we did a podcast together a couple of years, maybe a year or so ago. And you get to a point as a daughter or human being where your time is limited with your parents, and you're like, well, maybe it's too late and I don't want to say something because I just want to enjoy this time. And that's one thing. But like your example of, living a life and then going, well, the woman you said was in her mid 50s and she wasted her whole life and had no identity. So that's a totally separate thing. I just think to differentiate those things is so important. Yeah. Another point I wanted to ask you about is, if you are listening to this right now and I'm assuming you've already identified that you have the good daughter syndrome, what would you say to somebody that's listening right now? And they're thinking, well, I need to do something about this before it's too late. Where do I go? Do I go into therapy? Do I tell my audience that?
Super question. I would educate myself as much as I can. There are lots of good books out there on the market. I would say either get a best friend, a therapist, ideally, who has some knowledge of this. But really, most good therapists these days, no. Some people end up with a therapist will say, well, can't you just work it out with your mom? And she means the best for you. And so there's a lot of harm done in that way. But so just leave if that happens, or interview the therapist beforehand.
P.S. You should, sorry to talk over you. If you're listening, always interview your therapist. It's like dating. I say that all the time. If you don't like your therapist and it's like dating on an app, right?
That's a great
keep dating your therapist.
Right.
To find the right one.
Right. And I would say a lot of the women that I see, they come in, they're depressed or they're anxious. They don't know they have mother issues, or they're involved with a narcissistic man. And people are very reluctant to look at this stuff. So you want to choose a therapist who you really trust and who you really can open up to, and know it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. I can almost tell you what not to do. Like the solutions are in the problem. Don't go to a family member, because if you're the good daughter, they are benefiting from your doing so much of the work with mom. And a lot of women find themselves in this position. Lots of times brothers are the golden child and they're somehow just exempt from, not always, but that's a typical situation that I see. Also, another typical situation I see is dad is chief enabler. So you go to dad, mom's so unreasonable. Oh, I know, honey, but you know how your mother is. You just go back, just make up with her, because you're making it hard for the rest of us. So family systems are very hard to change. So as much as people are tempted to go to the siblings, to go to dad, don't do that, because you're going to get like, no, go back in your box and be to your mom what you've always been. So I would say expect it to be difficult. If you have a good friendship group that can debrief with you when you set that seemingly kind of low bar boundary and you get the pushback, you need to be able to go to them, because it is, and maybe your partner is somebody who understands. You know, lots of husbands or wives, if you're gay, don't want three people in a marriage. And they can be the support. They can say, I want to support you. I'm going to bring our relationship, and draw a boundary around it. It can actually do wonderful things if you have, a psychologically open spouse. So you could be surprised. You could go to them and say, I really need your help in this.
I think also I happen to have thank God, a really supportive husband, and I'm so grateful for that. But also I love what you said about the friends, because the friend thing, if you can bounce ideas off your friends and you're fortunate enough, even if you have one good friend, because it is true, the family dynamic is so complicated, right? And no matter what age you are, I think I talked about this a few weeks ago, because I was just around all of my family and my extended family. No matter how old I am, I always fall into the same place of being like, dumb Meghan, she doesn't know anything. That's why I thought it was funny that you said I was brilliant, because I've always kind of been like the youngest, and nobody took me or one of the youngest in my family. I have a younger brother, and I was just kind of not taken seriously, So it is interesting when you say that, like where you fall in the family is true.
And people who are free, I would say they're free to see you for exactly who you are. Yeah. They don't have I don't mean they don't have to have a negative, but an agenda. Well, so-and-so is always taking care of mom. And I'm going to tell women that are, I would say in their 50s, if you've got a difficult mom, when she gets older, she will not get easier. I would say a third of my coaching clients are like, they're 70 years old, their mother's still alive, because aging is a narcissistic injury. And so if mom's narcissistic or has, some cracks in her sense of self, which is a personality disorder, the more bad things happen, and aging unfortunately is. it's a narcissistic injury for me. So
because you're set in your ways, so you think you're always right, right? So as you age, like you think
function.
Yeah.
We all gain function, we lose function. So we lose our goals.
Yeah, it's not fun aging. I know.
It's not fun.
No, it's for the birds. I actually, when I was in Florida, I'm going to tell this story really quickly. Because I had to take a step away after it happened, because it's actually kind of funny. So Carter, my friend I talked about, and I were standing in line grabbing coffee in the morning, and a man came up behind me, and Carter is the same age as me. Like she's like the exact same age, maybe a year younger. And he said to her, "Oh, is that your mom?" Talking about me. But my back was to him, and I'm the vainest person in the world. So I was like, what? And I like swooped around and turned and I said something like, I'm not old. We're the same age. Like I was so offended by it. And then he said, where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm from California. And this was in Florida. Obviously, we know where this story is going. And he said something very offensive to me. He said, California, he's like, 3 states have gone downhill. He said, Illinois, California. And I said, let me stop you right there. This is my home. These are like, I've lived here for 25 years. And then I realized that I needed, because I'm a big mouth and I am not afraid to get into it with people. I'm just like that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to step away. And my friend Carter looked at me, and I realized in the moment that the man was probably in his mid 80s and who I should not be getting into it with him, because I think he was having major cognitive decline.
Oh, wow.
And
right. Okay.
Yeah. And at the time it took me a second. And then Carter was like, Meghan, I think because I just couldn't believe it. And the part of me that's like, so like, it's such a hard time in the world where people are so defensive about where they stand. I was ready to like get into it. And then I was like, okay, I need to take a step away, because he is of that, probably losing his mind a little bit. Yeah. So it is true. Like the aging piece of it, but also just having aunts and uncles and my mom that are all getting older, where they're so set in their ways. And I'm getting more set in my ways as I get older. So I think on that, to your point, we need to kind of take that into account but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be questioning relationships and not doing the work. It's never too late, I think, to do the work. Don't you agree?
I do. And so the boundaries that you set, or getting siblings involved in elder care, like set the stage, because when things get more difficult, you want to have, it pays off. It pays off in dividends.
Yeah.
This work does. It's so central, like you were saying. When you do the mother-daughter work, you're going to be a better friend. You're going to know how to interact with your boss better. You're going to pick better men. It's like it pays off. It's so hard. And then it pays off in so many ways that if you start in the periphery, sometimes you'll never miss a central point.
I think it's huge. And I also I'm a huge advocate of therapy. I say it all the time. I'm not in it right now. I need to go back in. But I think, I say therapy saved my life. I don't think it's ever too late. I think to be honest, I wish everybody would be in therapy, because we would have a much better world if everyone was in therapy. In closing, Katherine, I wanted you to tell people where they could find your book and where they can find you.
Thank you. The thing that you need to remember, if you resonate with this, is the good daughter syndrome. If you Google the good daughter syndrome, my name, Katherine Fabrizio, will come up. My book will come up. If you Google, if you put the good daughter syndrome quiz, that'll take you really where you need to be, because you'll take the quiz, see if you resonate with the questions, and go from there.
Okay. And are you on You are on Instagram, because I followed you today. You followed me. What is your Instagram for people that are listening?
The good daughter syndrome.
Okay. That's very easy. That's an easy one to find.
That's all you need to remember. And,
okay. I love talking to you today. And like you said, you don't hear your accent, but I think it's the cutest thing in the world. And I just wish I could have one. Everyone, please take care of yourselves. Be kind to everyone else. This is a rough little patch we're having in the world, in our country. And I just have to have faith. I am a person of faith. So lots of praying lately, and trying my best to have patience for other people, although it can be really hard. I think we go through all kinds of tests in life. And I believe that's part of why we're here, is we go through a series of tests, and hopefully we get to the next level, whatever you believe in, spirit, God, whatever it is. Just be kind. I think kindness is all we can really offer each other, and patience, like that story I just gave about the man, because I really wanted to go off on him, and thank God Carter was there. And then I realized later why he probably said what he said, and I had to think about it and realize I shouldn't have said what I said. In closing, Keep going. You matter. Your story matters. Thanks, Katherine.
Thank you so much for having me and your thoughtful questions and your brilliance.
Oh, thank you. I love that. Celeste, leave that in. She said it was brilliant 2 times.
Super.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.